The sound of heavy rain tapped against the windows, casting shadows across the wooden floor of the dimly lit living room. Layla Parker sat curled up on the plush grey sofa, her fingers absently scrolling through her phone as her husband's laughter echoed faintly from the kitchen. The smell of garlic and rosemary floated through the air, mixing awkwardly with her rising sense of unease. Josh, her husband of 8 years, had been different lately. Absent, secretive, and too easily distracted by his phone. Layla had tried to ignore it at first, convincing herself it was just work stress, but tonight, her gut wouldn't let her rest. The glow from Josh's phone, left on the counter, unattended, flickered as a message appeared. Layla's gaze lingered on it longer than she wanted to admit. A second message buzzed through, then a third, the soft vibrations pulling her toward the kitchen like a siren's call. With careful, quiet steps, she stood and approached the device. Her fingers trembled slightly as she unlocked the phone. She had memorized the passcode months ago, when trust wasn't something she needed to question. Her breath hitched as the messages unfolded before her eyes. They were from Tessa Ryder, a woman whose name she'd never seen before. "I miss you tonight," read the first message. The second was a picture, a dimly lit selfie of Tessa wrapped in silk sheets. The third message was more direct. "When can I see you again? Don't make me wait." Layla's heart pounded as if it would break through her ribs. Her fingers curled into fists, her nails digging into her palms. She heard Josh humming softly in the kitchen as he stirred something on the stove, oblivious to the storm brewing just a few feet behind him. For a brief second, she imagined throwing the phone at him, screaming, demanding answers. But something deeper held her back. Confronting him would be too easy and too predictable. No, she needed to know more. She needed control. Slipping the phone back onto the counter, she turned away, her mind racing faster than she could process. By the time Josh returned to the living room, setting a steaming plate of pasta on the table, Layla had already decided she wouldn't confront him tonight. Instead, she would wait, observe, and learn everything she could about Tessa Ryder. And when the time came, she would be ready. That night, while Josh slept soundly beside her, Layla lay wide awake in the dark, her laptop casting a cold glow on her face. With a few clicks, she found Tessa's Instagram profile. The page was a curated gallery of perfection: beach vacations, candlelit dinners, designer handbags, and cryptic captions. Tessa was beautiful, with long auburn hair and a confident smile that suggested she was used to getting what she wanted. Layla scrolled through picture after picture, absorbing every detail, memorizing her habits and favourite hangouts. She noticed a pattern in Tessa's photos: the same boutique cafe, the same wine bar, and several photos of a familiar navy blue car parked in the background. Josh's car. Her breath grew shallow as the evidence piled up, but instead of tears, a new emotion took hold: determination. Tessa wasn't just a faceless woman anymore. She was real, and Layla needed to meet her. Not as Josh's wife, but as someone Tessa wouldn't suspect. She shut the laptop quietly, her pulse steady now. If Tessa had become a part of her life, then Layla would become a part of hers. The next day, while Josh was at work, Layla dressed with purpose. She chose a casual yet flattering outfit: jeans, a light sweater, and boots that clicked softly on the pavement as she walked into the cafe she had seen in Tessa's posts. The place was cozy, with warm lighting and the rich smell of freshly brewed coffee. Layla scanned the room, her heart skipping when she spotted her target sitting by the window, typing something on her phone. Tessa looked exactly as she did in her photos: polished, poised, and radiant. Layla's nerves flared, but she buried them under a confident smile as she approached the counter and ordered a latte. As she waited, she pretended to search for a seat, her eyes darting toward Tessa's table. With calculated precision, she walked over, coffee in hand. "Is this seat taken?" she asked, her voice smooth and friendly. Tessa glanced up, slightly surprised but not bothered. "Oh, no, go ahead," she said with a polite smile. Layla sat down, her hands cradling the warm cup. The small talk came easily, discussing the weather, the cafe's cosy ambiance, and the struggle of balancing work and personal life. Tessa was surprisingly open, laughing easily and leaning in as they talked. Layla learned that Tessa worked in fashion marketing, loved yoga, and had recently ended a long-term relationship. She didn't mention Josh, but Layla didn't expect her to. Not yet. By the end of their conversation, Layla had planted the seed of friendship. "I come here often," she said, standing to leave. "Maybe we'll run into each other again." Tessa smiled, waving as Layla walked out the door. Once outside, Layla allowed herself a moment to breathe, the cool autumn air filling her lungs. The plan had begun, and it was already working. Tessa had no idea who she really was, or what Layla had in store for her. But soon enough, she would. The air outside was crisp, but Layla barely noticed it as she strolled down the sidewalk, her mind swirling with possibilities. She replayed every word exchanged with Tessa, dissecting her tone, her expressions, and the way her eyes lit up when she talked about her passions. Tessa wasn't a villain, not in the obvious sense. She seemed warm and approachable, the kind of woman who could easily win people over. But that only made it worse. Josh hadn't been lured by some predatory stranger. He had chosen someone he could build a connection with, and that stung deeper than Layla expected. By the time she reached her car, her breath came out in quick bursts, the emotions she had buried in the cafe now clawing their way to the surface. She gripped the steering wheel, knuckles turning white as she leaned her forehead against it. "Don't lose it now," she whispered to herself. "Not yet." The next few days were a delicate dance between normalcy and deceit. Layla played her role as the devoted wife seamlessly. She laughed at Josh's jokes during dinner, kissed him goodnight, and listened intently as he complained about work. But every moment they shared felt hollow, like she was performing in a play she no longer believed in. The only thing that kept her going was her secret plan and the knowledge that she was always one step ahead of him. Her phone buzzed one morning while she was sipping coffee at the kitchen counter. It was a text from an unknown number. "It was nice meeting you. Let's grab coffee again soon. Tessa." Layla's lips curved into a small, satisfied smile. Tessa had taken the bait. She quickly typed back, "I'd love that. How about tomorrow?" The response came almost instantly, and within minutes they had arranged to meet at a new cafe downtown. Layla stared at the screen for a moment before setting the phone down. Things were moving faster than she expected, but she wasn't about to slow down now. The next day, Layla arrived at the cafe early, choosing a seat near the back where they could talk without interruptions. Tessa arrived right on time, her hair swept into a sleek ponytail, and her smile as radiant as ever. "Hey," she greeted, sliding into the seat across from Layla. "I'm so glad you texted. I've been needing a break from work." They ordered their drinks, and as the conversation flowed, Layla carefully guided it toward more personal topics. She shared just enough about herself to seem genuine, but kept the details vague. "My husband travels a lot for work," she said at one point, tracing the rim of her coffee cup with her finger. "It can be lonely sometimes." Tessa nodded, her gaze softening with sympathy. "I get that. I was in a long-term relationship once where he was always away. It's hard to feel like a priority." The irony wasn't lost on Layla, but she kept her expression neutral. "You must be relieved that's over then. It sounds exhausting." "It was," Tessa admitted, her fingers playing with the edge of her sleeve. "But sometimes you meet people who make you feel like you're worth it again, you know." Layla's stomach twisted, but she forced herself to smile. "Yeah, I know. As they continued talking, Layla subtly probed for information about Josh without ever mentioning his name. She learned that Tessa had been seeing someone casually, though she described him as a bit complicated. When Tessa mentioned that he travelled often for work and had an intense but secretive personality, Layla knew she was talking about Josh. The confirmation sent a wave of anger through her, but she masked it with a playful laugh. Sounds like a mystery man, she teased. Tessa giggled. Yeah, he's a bit of a puzzle, but I like that about him. Layla filed that away in her mental notes, every detail building the foundation of her plan. By the time their drinks were empty, she had enough to start the next phase. As they stood outside the cafe, Tessa hugged Layla briefly. This was really fun. We should do it again soon. We will, Layla replied, her smile sweet but calculated. I'm sure of it. That night, she sat at her vanity, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her face looked calm, but her mind was far from it. She had played her part perfectly, but the weight of what she was doing was beginning to press down on her. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about control over her life, her emotions, and the man who thought he could betray her without consequences. As she brushed her hair, her phone buzzed again. It was another message from Tessa, this time with a picture of the dessert she had ordered after they left the cafe. You missed out on this. Next time, dessert's on me. Layla smirked as she typed back, Deal. She placed the phone down and leaned back in her chair, her eyes narrowing as she stared at her own reflection. The woman looking back at her wasn't the same Layla who had found those messages on Josh's phone. This version of her was sharper, more dangerous, and soon everyone would see exactly what she was capable of. Layla's mornings had become a routine of strategy rather than habit. She sipped her coffee at the kitchen table, scrolling through Tessa's latest social media posts with surgical precision. Every photo, every caption, and every tagged location painted a clearer picture of her life. Last night, Tessa had posted a picture of a rooftop bar, clinking wine glasses with friends. Layla studied the background, noting the skyline and the decorative lights, an upscale spot that Josh had taken her to once for their anniversary. Her lips pressed into a thin line. The web of connections between Josh and Tessa was tightening, and it was exactly what she needed. Today, she wasn't waiting for Tessa to text her. Instead, she would make her next move. Later that afternoon, Layla parked her car across from the trendy yoga studio she had seen on Tessa's Instagram stories. She stayed low in her seat, watching as women in leggings and tank tops walked out with gym bags slung over their shoulders. 15 minutes passed before she spotted her target, Tessa, her auburn hair pulled back, her face glowing from the post-workout sweat. She looked happy, carefree, completely unaware of the storm brewing behind her. Layla stepped out of her car, timing her approach perfectly as Tessa slowed down to check her phone. Tessa, Layla called out, feigning surprise. I thought that was you. Tessa turned, her face lighting up. Layla, what are you doing here? Oh, yes, I take yoga classes here too, but on different days, Layla lied smoothly. I was just driving by and saw you. That's so funny, Tessa said, adjusting the strap of her bag. We should take a class together sometime. I'd love that, Layla smiled warmly. Actually, do you have time for a quick coffee now? There's a great place just down the block. Tessa hesitated for a split second but then nodded. Sure, why not? They walked side by side, and Layla kept the conversation light as they entered the cozy cafe. Once they sat down, Layla leaned in, lowering her voice slightly as she spoke. So, how's the mystery man? She asked, her tone playful but deliberate. Tessa laughed, but there was a hint of hesitation in her eyes. He's complicated, like I said before. Things are good, but they're not exactly normal, you know. Layla tilted her head, feigning curiosity. Not normal? How? Well, He's always busy, and sometimes I feel like I'm not the only woman in his life. Tessa bit her lip as if debating whether to reveal more. It's stupid, I know, but I don't think he's completely honest with me. Layla's heart raced, but her face remained calm. This was it, the crack in the foundation she had been waiting for. She reached across the table and gently touched Tessa's hand. That's not stupid at all, she said softly. You deserve someone who's fully present and honest with you. Tessa sighed, her fingers tightening around her coffee cup. I've been thinking about confronting him, but I don't even know what I'd say. What if I'm wrong? Layla leaned back, letting her words sink in before speaking again. Sometimes, the best way to know the truth is to give them enough room to reveal it themselves. People like that always slip up eventually. Tessa nodded slowly, her gaze distant. You're probably right. I guess I've just been scared to face it. Layla smiled inwardly, knowing that fear was exactly what she needed Tessa to feel. But she wasn't done yet. Listen, she said, her voice warm but firm. If you ever need help or just someone to talk to, I'm here. No judgment. Thank you, Tessa said, her eyes shimmering with genuine gratitude. You're a really good friend. Layla's chest tightened at the word friend, but she quickly swallowed the emotion. Any time, she replied. As they left the cafe, Layla felt the weight of her plan shifting in her favour. She had planted the seeds of doubt and dependence, and soon Tessa would look to her for guidance when things inevitably fell apart. But there was still one piece of the puzzle she needed to control. Josh. That evening, as Josh scrolled through his phone on the couch, Layla sat next to him, resting her head on his shoulder. Busy day? She asked casually. Yeah, just work, he muttered, barely glancing up. She fought the urge to snatch the phone out of his hands. Instead, she slid her hand along his arm, causing him to finally look at her. Let's do something special this weekend, she suggested. Just the two of us. He hesitated, and for a moment she thought he might decline. But then he nodded, smiling faintly. Yeah, that sounds nice. Layla kissed his cheek, masking the bitterness she felt. He had no idea that she was pulling the strings now, that every move he made was being tracked and calculated. Soon, he wouldn't be able to lie his way out of the trap she was setting. As Josh returned to scrolling through his phone, Layla leaned back and smiled to herself. The game was far from over, but she was already winning. The weekend arrived with an unusual stillness in the air, as if the universe was holding its breath, waiting for Layla's plan to take its next step. She had chosen a quaint little cabin on the outskirts of the city for their getaway, a place where the mountains whispered secrets and the world felt far away. Josh seemed genuinely relaxed as they drove up, the trees blurring past the car windows, his hand resting lazily on the steering wheel. To anyone watching, they would have looked like a happy couple escaping the chaos of city life. But Layla's mind was anything but at peace. She spent the first evening playing the role of the loving wife, cooking dinner in the cabin's rustic kitchen while Josh poured them glasses of wine. They sat by the fireplace, talking about nothing of importance, work, their favourite travel destinations, and the books Layla had been reading. It felt eerily normal, like the life she had once imagined for them before everything fell apart. But as the night stretched on, and Josh slipped into bed, Layla stayed awake. She sat by the window, staring out at the dark forest, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. The glow from the screen lit up her face as she scrolled through her messages, stopping at the one from Tessa she had received earlier that evening. I'm meeting him tomorrow night. I think I'm finally ready to ask him what we really are. Wish me luck. Layla's pulse quickened as she read it again. Tessa was walking straight into the lion's den, but Layla wasn't ready for that confrontation to happen. Not yet. She needed Tessa's trust to stay intact just a little longer. Her thumbs hovered over the keyboard before she finally typed back. "You're brave, but are you sure tomorrow's the right time? Maybe you should wait until you know more. What if there's something he hasn't told you yet?" The message delivered, and Layla set her phone down, breathing deeply as she leaned back against the chair. She wasn't just controlling Josh anymore. She was steering Tessa's emotions, keeping her tethered to the doubts and fears Layla had carefully cultivated. With Tessa hesitant to confront him directly, Layla would have more time to orchestrate the perfect moment for everything to fall apart. The next morning, Josh kissed her forehead before heading out for a hike on the nearby trails, giving her the alone time she needed. She watched him disappear into the trees, her fingers tightening around the edge of her coffee cup. The cabin felt quieter without him, and for the first time in a long while, Layla felt the weight of her choices pressing down on her chest. But before she could sink too deep into her thoughts, her phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Tessa. It was Josh. He had accidentally left his work phone behind, and a message notification flashed across the screen. Layla's breath caught as she stared at it, her instincts screaming for her to unlock it. Her fingers hesitated for only a moment before she entered the passcode. The message was from Tessa. "I'm nervous. Are you sure you want to meet tomorrow night?" Layla's blood turned to ice as she read the words. Josh had been planning to see Tessa tomorrow, knowing full well they were supposed to be spending the weekend together. Anger rippled through her, but beneath it was something colder, something strategic. She wasn't going to confront him yet. No, this was an opportunity she hadn't expected, and she wasn't about to waste it. She quickly deleted the message, ensuring that Josh would never see it when he returned. Then, with trembling fingers, she sent a reply pretending to be him. "Don't be nervous. It'll be worth it." She hit send, the thrill of control surging through her veins like a drug. When Josh returned from his hike, sweaty and content, Layla met him with a bright smile, hiding her resentment behind the mask she had perfected. They spent the rest of the day exploring the nearby lake and sharing a quiet picnic by the water. Josh seemed oblivious, laughing and holding her hand like they were still newlyweds. But Layla wasn't fooled. Every moment of his affection only strengthened her resolve. That night, as he slept soundly beside her, Layla lay awake once more, her mind weaving the final strands of her plan. Tomorrow, while Josh believed he was sneaking off to meet Tessa in secret, Layla would be waiting. And when the moment was right, she would deliver a blow that neither of them would see coming. For the first time in weeks, Layla felt a sense of calm. The pieces were in place, and she was no longer afraid of the truth. In fact, she was ready to burn it all down. The next evening arrived like a predator in the shadows, creeping in silently but ready to strike. Layla had spent the day preparing, her every move calculated to ensure that nothing would go wrong. She watched Josh from the kitchen window as he loaded his overnight bag into the trunk of the car, telling her he had to check on a client in the city. His lie was smooth, rehearsed, too easy for him to say. He kissed her goodbye as if nothing was amiss, his hand lingering on her waist like he still had the right to touch her. "Drive safe," she whispered with a soft smile that masked her contempt. As soon as his car disappeared down the winding road, Layla sprang into action. She grabbed her own keys and headed to the car she had parked out of sight earlier that morning. The thrill of the chase pulsed through her veins, but she kept her mind focused on the task at hand. She knew exactly where he was going, the same boutique hotel they had used when their marriage was still exciting. How poetic that he would return to it for betrayal. The drive into the city felt surreal. The fading light of dusk painted the buildings in hues of gold and orange, as if the world was blissfully unaware of the storm about to unfold. Layla kept her grip steady on the wheel, her mind rehearsing every possible scenario. Would Tessa believe her when she revealed the truth? Would Josh try to lie his way out of it, or would he crumble under the weight of his guilt? Either way, tonight was the night she'd force them to face what they'd done. She arrived at the hotel just in time to see Josh's car pulling into the parking lot. Her heart pounded as she parked a few spaces away, her fingers tapping anxiously against the steering wheel. She watched him exit the car, adjusting his collar as he headed toward the entrance with the confidence of a man who thought he could get away with anything. Her lip curled in disgust, but she stayed put, waiting for the next player in this twisted game. 15 minutes later, a cab pulled up to the hotel entrance and Tessa stepped out. She looked stunning, dressed in a sleek black dress with her hair cascading over her shoulders like waves of fire. Layla watched as Tessa checked her phone, probably a message from Josh, before walking inside. The sight of her stirred something complicated in Layla's chest. Tessa wasn't the monster here. She had been lured into the same trap, blinded by the same lies. But that didn't mean Layla would let her off the hook easily. With one final breath to steady herself, Layla grabbed her purse and stepped out of the car. She walked briskly across the parking lot, her heels clicking against the pavement like a countdown to destruction. Inside, the hotel lobby was warm and inviting, with soft music playing in the background and the faint smell of vanilla lingering in the air. None of it mattered. Her eyes locked onto the elevator just as the doors closed, carrying Josh and Tessa to their room. Layla didn't hesitate. She approached the front desk with a calm demeanor, flashing her sweetest smile at the receptionist. "Hi, I'm supposed to be meeting my husband, Josh Parker. I think he forgot to tell me what room he's in." The receptionist hesitated briefly before checking the system. "Room 408, she said with a polite nod. "Thank you." Layla turned toward the elevators, her heart thumping wildly. Room 408. It was time. As she rode the elevator up, she could hear her own breath, quick and shallow, competing with the steady hum of the machinery. Her fingers grazed the inside of her purse, feeling the cold outline of the small audio recorder she had hidden there. She didn't just want this confrontation for her own satisfaction. She wanted proof. She wanted to make sure Josh's lies couldn't be buried. The elevator dinged, and the doors slid open. The hallway stretched out before her, silent and dimly lit, the plush carpet muffling her footsteps as she approached the door. She stopped in front of room 408, her hand hovering over the handle. For a moment, she hesitated, her mind racing with doubt. Was she ready for this? Would it break her to see them together? But then she remembered the messages, the late nights waiting for him to come home, and the weight of her own loneliness. No, this wasn't about breaking. It was about reclaiming her power. She knocked. Tessa stood, her voice trembling. "Layla, I didn't know—" "Save it!" Layla snapped, her eyes locking onto Josh. "This isn't about her. This is about you." Josh rubbed the back of his neck, his usual confident demeanor crumbling. "I can explain." Layla let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, I'm sure you can. But I don't need your explanation. I have everything I need." She pulled out the audio recorder, holding it up for them to see. "I've been recording everything. The lies, the secrets, the texts. You think you can just walk away from this?" Tessa's eyes darted to Josh, confusion and betrayal written all over her face. "You said you were going to leave her," she whispered, "and you believed him." Layla's voice cut through the room like a blade. "He wasn't going to leave me. He just wanted to have it all. Me at home and you on the side." Josh stepped forward, desperation leaking into his voice. "Layla, please, we can fix this." But Layla held up a hand, silencing him. "There's no fixing this. You've already destroyed it." Tessa looked like she was on the verge of tears, but Layla had no sympathy left to give. She walked toward the door, pausing only to deliver the final blow. "Josh, You're going to get everything you deserve. And as for you, Tessa, remember this night every time you think someone's telling you the truth." With that, she left the room, her heels clicking down the hallway like a victory march. She didn't cry. She didn't look back. The game was over, and she had won. But this wasn't just about revenge. It was about freedom. And as Layla stepped into the elevator, she realized she wasn't just leaving Josh behind. She was leaving the woman she used to be behind too. As Layla drove home, the city lights blurred through the windshield, like distant memories fading into the night. Her grip on the steering wheel was steady, her breath even. She expected to feel some wave of emotion, rage, sorrow, or even regret, but there was only numbness. The kind of numbness that comes after the storm when the wreckage is too massive to comprehend. But she didn't mind it. The silence inside her was comforting, like a blank canvas waiting for something new to be painted on it. The tires hummed against the road, a monotonous background noise as she replayed the confrontation over and over in her mind. The panic in Josh's voice, the look of betrayal on Tessa's face. It all felt surreal, like a scene from a movie she had watched from a safe distance. But this wasn't fiction. She had orchestrated this chaos, every twist and turn of it, and now she was left with the aftermath. Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat, snapping her out of her thoughts. She glanced at the screen. It was a message from Tessa. "Can we talk? I didn't know about you, I swear." Layla's lips pressed into a thin line. The old version of herself, the one who wanted explanations and closure, would have answered. But tonight, Layla had no interest in soothing Tessa's guilt. She ignored the message, letting it disappear into the void of unanswered texts. By the time she pulled into the driveway, the house looked different to her. It wasn't the warm, cozy sanctuary it had once been. Now, it was just a place where secrets had thrived, where lies had been whispered under the cover of night. She stepped inside, the sound of her heels echoing against the hardwood floor. The air felt heavier here, suffocating. Without bothering to turn on the lights, she headed upstairs, stripping off her coat and shoes along the way. The bedroom was dark, the bed neatly made as if waiting for someone who would never come back. She sat on the edge of it, her fingers brushing against the cool fabric of the comforter. Memories flashed through her mind, late-night conversations, lazy Sunday mornings, the way Josh used to make her laugh when he wasn't too busy hiding things from her. For a brief second, her chest tightened with the weight of what she had lost. But then she reminded herself she hadn't lost him. She had let him go. Her phone buzzed again, this time breaking her resolve to ignore it. She picked it up, expecting another message from Tessa, but it wasn't her. It was Josh. "I messed up. Please, just give me a chance to explain. I love you, Layla." She stared at the message, her thumb hovering over the screen. Love. What a fragile, deceptive word it had become. He had said it 1,000 times, each time with the same conviction, and yet none of it had been enough to stop him from tearing their life apart. Layla didn't respond. Instead, she tossed the phone onto the nightstand and headed to the bathroom. She turned on the shower, the sound of rushing water filling the silence as steam began to cloud the room. She stepped under the stream, letting the warmth wash over her, cleanse her. It felt symbolic, like she was shedding the version of herself who had endured so much pain, leaving it to swirl down the drain. When she finally emerged, her skin flushed and her hair damp, she stood in front of the mirror. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel like a woman holding everything together by a thread. She saw someone new, someone who had taken back control, who had faced the truth and survived it. And she wasn't done yet. She walked back into the bedroom, slipping into a soft robe and sitting cross-legged on the bed. She grabbed her laptop from the nightstand, opening it with purpose. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she drafted an email to Josh's company's board of directors. She attached the audio recordings she had collected over the past few weeks, conversations where Josh admitted to mishandling client accounts and using company resources to fund his escapades. Before tonight, she had debated whether or not to take this step. But after seeing him with Tessa, after hearing the lies he tried to spin even when he was caught, there was no hesitation left. Josh didn't deserve the life he had built on deception, and Layla didn't care how much he begged for mercy. She read over the email one last time before hitting send. A rush of adrenaline flooded her veins, but it wasn't the kind that came from revenge. It was liberation, the feeling of unshackling herself from the weight of a man who had dragged her down for too long. The email sent, she closed the laptop and leaned back against the pillows, exhaling deeply. Outside, the wind howled softly, as if the night itself was celebrating her freedom. For the first time in what felt like forever, Layla wasn't waiting for an apology or an explanation. She wasn't waiting for anyone to fix her. She had fixed herself. As she drifted off to sleep, her phone vibrated one last time, the soft hum barely registering in her tired mind. But she didn't care. The world could wait. Layla Parker was done chasing answers. She was too busy writing her next chapter. Morning sunlight spilled through the cracks in the curtains, casting soft streaks of gold across the bedroom floor. Layla blinked awake slowly, her body heavy with exhaustion but her mind unusually clear. For the first time in weeks, she hadn't woken up dreading what the day might bring. Instead, there was a strange, quiet, calm, a sense of finality. She sat up, stretching as the events of the previous night flickered in her mind. Josh's betrayal, the confrontation, Tessa's pleas, and the email that could destroy Josh's professional life. It all felt like the closing pages of a long, painful story. But before she could reflect any further, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. She sighed, reaching for it. There were several missed calls from Josh and another message from Tessa. "Please, Layla, I need to talk to you. I didn't know. I feel like such an idiot." Layla ignored them both and scrolled to the next notification. An email confirmation that Josh's company had received her message. Her lips curved into a small, satisfied smile. She could picture it now, the board reviewing the audio files, the looks of disbelief and anger as they realized how deeply Josh had deceived not only his wife, but the company they trusted him to manage. His world was crumbling, and there was no one to save him. Not even Tessa. The thought of Tessa tugged at her, though. As much as Layla wanted to hate her, she couldn't ignore the guilt simmering beneath the surface. Tessa had been lied to just as much as she had. She had believed in promises Josh never intended to keep. And now she was reaching out, hoping for something. Maybe forgiveness. Maybe closure. Layla set the phone down and walked to the kitchen, where she made herself a cup of coffee, the rich aroma filling the air. She leaned against the counter, sipping slowly as she considered what to do next. The old version of herself would have ignored Tessa, cutting off any connection to that part of her life. But the woman she had become wasn't afraid to face the hard truths anymore. Before she could second-guess herself, she picked up her phone and called Tessa. The line rang twice before Tessa answered, her voice breathless. "Layla." "Yes," Layla said, keeping her tone neutral. "You wanted to talk." There was a pause, followed by a shaky sigh. "I didn't know he was married when we met. He told me later, but by then I was already too invested. He promised he'd leave you. I was stupid to believe him." Layla listened, her fingers tapping lightly against the countertop. "He's good at making people believe what he wants them to," she said. "You weren't the first, and you probably won't be the last." "I'm sorry," Tessa whispered. "I didn't mean to hurt you." For a moment, Layla considered lashing out, letting all the anger and betrayal pour out of her. But then she realized something. Tessa wasn't the one she wanted to hurt. The woman on the other end of the line was just another victim, and Layla was tired of punishing herself by holding on to the pain. "I believe you," she said quietly, "but this isn't about you anymore. It's about me." "I understand," Tessa replied. I hope you find peace." "I already have," Layla said, surprising even herself. "Goodbye, Tessa." She hung up, the conversation leaving her with a strange sense of relief. By forgiving Tessa, she wasn't letting her off the hook. She was letting herself move on. She finished her coffee and set the mug in the sink, the weight in her chest lifting just a little more. The rest of the day passed in a blur of mundane tasks: laundry, organising the bookshelf, and responding to work emails. It felt strange to do normal things after everything she had been through, but it was exactly what she needed. By the time evening arrived, the house felt less like a prison and more like a place she could rebuild her life. As the sun set, casting a warm orange glow across the living room, Layla sat on the couch with a glass of wine in hand. Her phone buzzed once more, but this time it wasn't Josh or Tessa. It was a message from her best friend Maya, who had been in the dark about everything. "I haven't heard from you in forever. Let's catch up soon." Layla smiled, her fingers tapping out a reply. "Yes, I need that. I'll tell you everything." When she hit send, it felt like the final step in closing the chapter on her old life. She had spent so long keeping her pain hidden, pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. But now, she was ready to be honest, not just with her friends, but with herself. She leaned back on the couch, the warmth of the wine spreading through her chest. Outside, the wind had died down, and the world felt quieter, softer. Layla didn't know exactly what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of it. She had survived the lies, the betrayal, and the heartbreak, and now she was free to rebuild, free to rediscover herself, free to live. And as she closed her eyes, she knew that this wasn't the end of her story. It was just the beginning. The next morning arrived with a kind of clarity that Layla hadn't felt in years. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting soft lines across the bedroom floor as she sat up, stretching her arms overhead. For the first time in what felt like forever, she wasn't waking up with the weight of suspicion or dread pressing against her chest. Today felt different, lighter, open to possibilities she hadn't allowed herself to imagine before. After a quick shower, she slipped into a casual pair of jeans and a cozy sweater, tying her damp hair into a loose bun. She brewed a fresh pot of coffee and opened the kitchen window, letting in the crisp morning air. The distant hum of the neighbourhood waking up was comforting, a reminder that life went on, even after the chaos of the past few weeks. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She hesitated for a moment before picking it up. It wasn't Josh or Tessa, it was her lawyer. The sight of his name on the screen gave her a small sense of relief. The divorce papers had been in motion for a few days now, but this call could mean final confirmation. She answered, steadying her voice. "Good morning, Miss Parker," the lawyer said politely. "I just wanted to let you know that Josh has officially received the papers. He hasn't contested anything yet, so if things proceed smoothly, it should be finalised in a few weeks." Layla closed her eyes for a moment, absorbing the information. "Thank you," she replied. "And if he does contest, we'll be prepared, but given what you've provided us, the evidence of his misconduct and infidelity, I doubt he'll want to drag this out in court." She nodded, even though he couldn't see her. "Good. Let me know if anything changes." After ending the call, she placed the phone down and leaned against the counter. There was no satisfaction in knowing Josh had received the papers, only a sense of quiet closure. The man she had loved was gone, replaced by someone she no longer recognized. Now, it was time to make sure her life no longer revolved around the ghost of their marriage. The day unfolded gently, with no surprises or interruptions. She went for a walk in the park, savouring the cool breeze and the rustling of leaves beneath her feet. She smiled at passing joggers, waved at an elderly couple feeding pigeons, and even stopped to pet a golden retriever who wagged its tail excitedly at her. It was the kind of ordinary joy she hadn't allowed herself to enjoy while living under the shadow of betrayal. On her way back home, she passed a small bookstore with a chalkboard sign out front that read, "Fresh starts begin here. Discover your next adventure." The sign made her pause, her lips curving into a soft smile. She stepped inside, breathing in the comforting smell of old pages and coffee from the cafe in the back. She wandered aimlessly through the aisles, letting her fingers brush the spines of novels until a title caught her attention, The Art of Letting Go. She picked up the book and skimmed the back cover. It wasn't a self-help book in the traditional sense. It was a collection of short stories about people who had faced loss, heartbreak, and change, and how they found new beginnings in unexpected places. Something about it resonated with her, so she bought it and tucked it under her arm as she walked back out into the sunlight. Later that afternoon, she sat on her porch, sipping tea and flipping through the pages. The stories were raw, honest, and filled with the kind of vulnerability she had been afraid to confront in herself. But as she read, she realized that vulnerability wasn't a weakness. It was a strength. It meant she'd cared deeply, loved fully, and survived the pain that came with it. Her phone buzzed again, and this time it was Maya, her best friend, confirming their dinner plans for the evening. Layla smiled as she replied, "See you at 7. Can't wait to catch up." She was ready to talk, to let someone in after keeping everything bottled up for so long. The restaurant Maya had chosen was a small, cozy spot, with dim lighting and the scent of freshly baked bread wafting through the air. When Layla arrived, Maya was already seated in a corner booth, waving excitedly. Her warm embrace was the kind of comfort Layla hadn't realized she needed until that moment. As they ordered drinks, Maya wasted no time. "Okay, spill. What's been going on with you? You've been MIA for weeks." Layla took a sip of her wine, exhaling slowly before she began. She told Maya everything: the discovery of Josh's affair, the secret meetings with Tessa, the confrontation, and the carefully orchestrated plan to expose him. Maya's eyes widened with every detail, and by the time Layla finished, she was sitting back in her seat, speechless. "Holy, Layla," Maya breathed. "You went full femme fatale on him." Layla laughed, the sound genuine and freeing. "I guess I did." "I can't believe you held all of that in," Maya said, shaking her head. "You're stronger than I thought." "I didn't feel strong at first," Layla admitted. "I felt broken, like my entire world had collapsed. But somewhere along the way, I realized that the only way to fix it was to take control. And now, I'm done letting his choices define me." Maya reached across the table, squeezing Layla's hand. "I'm proud of you." "Thanks," Layla smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. "But I don't want to talk about him anymore. Tell me about you. What's new in your world?" They spent the rest of the evening laughing over Maya's dating disasters and swapping stories about old memories. By the time they left the restaurant, Layla felt lighter, as if she had left the last remnants of her old life behind. As she drove home, the city lights twinkling around her, Layla realized something: she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. And while the road ahead was still uncertain, she wasn't afraid to travel it alone. Back home, she placed the book she had bought earlier on her nightstand and climbed into bed, pulling the blankets up around her. She wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, but for once, she didn't need to know. She had learned that sometimes the unknown was where the most beautiful parts of life waited to unfold. And as she drifted off to sleep, she knew one thing for certain: she was ready to embrace whatever came next. The next few days passed quietly, but not without significance. Layla embraced the stillness, treating it like a gift after the storm she had weathered. She found comfort in the ordinary, folding laundry, making breakfast, and binge-watching her favourite shows without interruption. There were no messages from Josh, no calls from Tessa. The silence wasn't ominous this time. It was liberating. On the third morning, as she sipped her coffee on the porch, her phone buzzed with a new email. It was from Josh's company. "Thank you for providing the necessary information. We are conducting a formal review and will follow up shortly." She leaned back in her chair, smiling to herself. It was only a matter of time before Josh's perfect little world crumbled. But she wasn't waiting around for updates. She had already made peace with it. Whatever came next for him was his problem, not hers. Later that afternoon, Layla decided to visit the art gallery downtown. It had been years since she'd gone on her own. Back when her life revolved around Josh's schedule, she had always dragged him along, pretending his disinterest didn't bother her. But today, she wanted to go for herself, to lose herself in the vibrant strokes of colour and meaning that hung on the walls. The gallery was quiet, with only a few other visitors strolling through the rooms. Layla took her time, stopping in front of a painting that seemed to pull her in. It was abstract, an explosion of blues, purples and golds swirling together, like chaos and calm coexisting. The plaque beside it read, "Metamorphosis, the beauty of transition." She stared at it for a long moment, the words resonating deeply. She had been in the middle of her own metamorphosis, shedding the version of herself that had lived in Josh's shadow. And now, standing here, she realised that the chaos she had endured wasn't just destruction. It had been the catalyst for change. She wasn't the same woman anymore, and that was the most beautiful thing of all. "Stunning, isn't it?" a voice said from beside her. Layla turned to see a man standing next to her, his gaze fixed on the painting. He was tall, with dark hair that fell messily across his forehead, and a warm smile that reached his eyes. He looked comfortable, like someone who belonged in this space. "It is," she replied, returning the smile. "It feels like it's telling a story without words." He nodded, folding his arms as he studied the canvas. "I come here every few weeks just to see this one. It's a good reminder that even when life feels chaotic, there's something beautiful on the other side." Layla's chest tightened for a moment, but not from pain. This time, it was the strange sense of possibility that made her heart flutter. "I couldn't agree more." "I'm Ben, by the way," he said, extending a hand. "Layla." She shook his hand, feeling a spark of warmth in the gesture. They spent the next hour walking through the gallery together, discussing their favourite pieces and the stories they imagined behind them. Layla was surprised by how easy the conversation was, how natural it felt to talk to someone who wasn't tied to her past. Ben didn't know her history, and for the first time in weeks, she wasn't defined by it. She was just herself. When they reached the end of the exhibit, Ben turned to her, his hands tucked casually into his pockets. "There's a cafe around the corner that has the best pastries in the city. Would you want to grab a coffee with me?" Layla hesitated for a moment, her mind flashing back to everything she had been through. But then she remembered the painting, the chaos and the calm, the beauty of transition. She smiled, feeling the weight of her hesitation lifting. "I'd like that." They walked out of the gallery together, the crisp afternoon air wrapping around them as they strolled down the street. For once, Layla didn't feel the need to overthink what this moment could mean. It wasn't about moving on or starting over. It was about allowing herself to enjoy the present without the burden of her past. At the cafe, they sat by the window, sipping their drinks as the world passed by outside. Ben made her laugh with stories about his travels, and Layla found herself sharing bits of her life that she hadn't talked about in years. Her love for art, her dreams of travelling solo, and the way she had once wanted to open a small boutique. It felt like peeling back layers she had forgotten she had, rediscovering the parts of herself that had been buried beneath years of compromise. When they finished their coffee, Ben walked her to her car, the conversation lingering between them like the warmth of the setting sun. "I had a really great time today," he said, his gaze soft. "Me too," Layla replied. For once, she wasn't worried about what came next. She was content with the moment as it was. Before he left, Ben handed her a small napkin with his phone number scribbled on it. "If you ever want to continue the conversation, or grab another coffee." Layla accepted it with a smile, tucking it into her purse. "I might just do that." As she drove home, the napkin resting beside her on the seat, Layla realised that this was what healing felt like. It wasn't a grand, dramatic moment of closure. It was a series of small, quiet victories. It was feeling the sunlight on her face without the shadow of the past creeping in. It was laughter over coffee with someone new. It was knowing that she could be happy again, not because she had someone else, but because she had found herself. When she got home, she placed the napkin in the drawer of her nightstand, not as a promise, but as a possibility. And for now, that was enough. The next morning, Layla woke up to the sound of birds chirping outside her window, the sunlight casting a gentle glow across her room. She stretched lazily, savouring the peace that seemed to have settled into her bones. As she got ready for the day, she thought about the napkin with Ben's number, tucked safely away in her nightstand. She wasn't ready to call him just yet, but the thought of having the option filled her with a quiet sense of excitement. After breakfast, she decided to take a short drive to the beach. It wasn't far, just an hour's trip along winding coastal roads with breathtaking ocean views. She had always loved the beach, but rarely went there alone. In the past, she had convinced herself that it wasn't as fun without company, but today, she was determined to enjoy it on her terms. She arrived just as the morning tide was retreating, leaving behind damp sand and scattered seashells glinting under the sunlight. The cool breeze carried the faint scent of salt and seaweed, and Layla inhaled deeply, letting the air fill her lungs. She slipped off her sandals and walked along the shoreline, the cold water lapping at her ankles. The rhythmic crashing of the waves seemed to mirror the calm in her heart. For so long, she had felt like she was drowning, fighting to keep her head above water. But now, she realised she had made it to shore. The past was behind her, its weight no longer dragging her down. She found a spot near the dunes and spread out a blanket, pulling out her book, The Art of Letting Go. As she read, the words seemed to speak directly to her soul, each short story a reflection of someone who had been broken and healed in their own time. One particular passage caught her attention, and she read it twice. Sometimes, letting go isn't about forgetting what hurt you. It's about remembering what you learned and using it to build something stronger. Layla closed the book, her eyes misting as she stared out at the horizon. She had spent so much time thinking that letting go meant erasing everything. Josh, Tessa, the pain of betrayal. But now she understood that those experiences had shaped her, and she didn't have to run from them. They were but part of her story, and she could own them without being defined by them. Her phone buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a message from her lawyer. Josh has agreed to all the terms. The divorce is officially moving forward without any delays. She exhaled slowly, her fingers tightening around the phone. This was it. the last major step in freeing herself from the life she no longer wanted. She texted back a simple, "Thank you," before setting the phone aside and leaning back against the blanket. The sun warmed her skin, and for the first time, the word divorce didn't feel like a failure. It felt like a beginning. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of children laughing nearby. She turned her head to see a young boy chasing his sister along the water's edge, their parents watching from a distance. The scene made her smile. Life moved on, even after heartache. She could move on too. As the afternoon wore on, she packed up her things and headed back to her car, her feet sandy but her spirit light. The drive home was peaceful, with the windows down and the wind tangling her hair. She hummed along to the radio, a sense of freedom settling in her chest like an old friend she hadn't seen in years. When she arrived home, she checked her mailbox and found a small package waiting for her. It had no return address, just her name written in elegant handwriting. Curious, she carried it inside and opened it at the kitchen table. Inside was a framed photo of her and Josh from their early days of marriage, back when things were good, before the lies and betrayal. There was no note, but she knew it had come from him. The timing was too perfect. For a moment, she stared at the photo, her mind flooding with memories. Their wedding day, their first apartment, the nights they stayed up talking about their dreams. It wasn't all bad. There had been love once, and maybe, in some way, Josh had loved her the best he could. But his love had come with cracks, and she'd spent too long trying to fill them. She set the photo aside, breathing deeply. She didn't need it as a reminder of what she had lost. She had something far more valuable now, a clear vision of what she deserved. Without hesitation, she placed the photo in a box labeled donate and sealed it shut. That night, as she sat on the porch with a cup of tea, the sky painted in shades of pink and orange, she felt at peace. The chaos was behind her, and the future stretched out like the open sea, vast, unpredictable, but full of promise. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Ben. "Hey, just thinking about our conversation at the gallery. Hope you're having a great day." Layla smiled, her fingers hovering over the screen before she typed back, "I am. Thanks for reaching out. Let's get that coffee soon." As she sent the message, she realized she wasn't rushing into anything. She was moving forward at her own pace, one step at a time. She had rebuilt herself piece by piece, and now she was ready to explore where life might take her next. With the stars beginning to twinkle above her, Layla leaned back and closed her eyes, letting the gentle evening breeze carry her forward.